clarified. It just.
Can you hide the words just for a second? I want to read the Latin. Say behind it.
I looked it up.
We've been studying
Are
Latin
those your fairy wings?
in school.
Yeah.
Marcus.
Double tap it. Jim Sharp back.
Yeah, double click, double right click,
Double right click?
no, left click.
Just go cut.
Just too much effort. You can read it later.
All you gotta do is click on it and move it.
Can you just go to the
I
next
can't
slide?
see that far.
Can you go to the next slide? Because you use the same background. Is there just another one where
Can we just do it later?
you just can't click next slide?
It's covered up in the next. It's covered in all slides.
If you want a better picture, I have a better one I took.
I know Fesset is made. I'm guessing that's Marcus. Or
Markel.
Agrippus, or what's the A? Marcus Agrippus? Agrippa? Marcus Agrippa.
I think I remember that.
A-L-F.
No, that's because I'm doing a slideshow.
What is that building called?
You guys want to go make cookies?
Guys ready?
Not the Acropolis.
You know what the word says?
If I have to.
I think
We're gonna combine kids. We're doing a Purim lesson.
Okay.
Do you want me to come assist?
Actually, Mokumi's gonna help this morning, so we're good.
Fantastic.
If you ever help, let me know. Thank
I mean, Justin might know, he's the one who.
Well, Joe says he has a picture. He knows what building that is.
Yeah, that's
Here.
Is simple stuff.
Did you get that?
Buster says it's the Pantheon.
Pantheon.
Are you Pantheon or the Parthenon?
Pantheon.
I thought Pantheon was the given to
Yeah, no, you're
a
right.
panel of gods.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say just all the gods. Pantheon.
Yes,
I
it's
thought that was only in Greece.
No, that's
a collection of gods, so you can have a pantheon of
That's in Rome.
Greek gods, you can have a pantheon of,
Roman gods,
Norse
Northern
gods.
gods, Norris.
it's probably Greek in origin.
Marcus Agrippa, the son of Lucius, 3 times consul, built this.
Yep.
Septimius?
3 times.
I don't know how to say his name.
Marcus Agrippa.
Is that Septimius?
Septimius.
Oh, we were reading the Latin in the background on the building. I was decoding,
Oh,
but they used too many single
All
letters.
capitals.
Yeah, to represent words. A.
well, I was trying to read the emperor's name, whatever the heck his name was. Septimius?
It's a lot of vowels.
I don't
You
know.
mean,
Marcus Agrippa, son of Lucius.
So that would be the L would be Lucius, F would be Filius, son. Postertivum, that would probably be the 3 times consul. Fesset is built or made.
we're out of batteries.
9 volts?
No, we're out of batteries.
It's because I stopped shopping at Costco. For the
a soccer game up at Strawberry Field. It ends at 11:15,
Completely out.
and I have
Yep.
donuts for his birthday. I'm taking up to the team, so I'm going to be off.
Can the ladies text Jennifer and let her know that we don't have any audio?
Jennifer's home.
She usually, as soon as she sees the alert that this is live, she hops on, on her drive in. I know because, like, as soon as it's live, because Laura's way late, she texts me and like, there's no audio. Well, give me like 2 minutes.
Dude, I feel ya. Just remember the source.
I know.
Trust me, I feel ya.
We've all gotten a Jennifer text,
Yes.
a premature.
Or 100. Okay, 100. Especially where she starts in the middle of a subject.
Oh, I've gotten those
What
texts.
the hell are you talking about, Chris? Don't say it like that.
I do. I tell her.
Which is funny because when we used to drive them, they were never there on time. And I'm like, I wait on you to come down
Why
twice
I
a week.
can't drive them, because between their anxiety and Aisen's anxiety, it's like, it's just way too much in one car. I could probably switch, like Aisen's anxiety would be less if like Laura drives.
It's too much for everybody.
They just set each other off, and then someone will slam a door in the past. Like, it's too much.
All right, everybody have a good weekend. Having a good weekend. You guys all moved in?
Thank you again.
Is your other house all empty?
Yeah, we passed it off, handed the keys back yesterday. Got
Did
it
you guys
all-
have to hire cleaning?
I hired somebody to clean.
If you didn't have cats, it would be that hard.
Her cats are super clean.
I hadn't, yeah. I hired my brother to clean, and then when Jeff did the walkthrough with the landlords, Andrea was like, "You should fire your cleaner."
Yeah.
It's like, ooh.
Which one, Aaron? or
Yeah, I can't remember.
Daniel. There was, if he had a checklist, he's got ADHD, so he gets really like, he'll half clean everything. So like, the microwave was spotless, but he completely forgot the oven.
Mhm.
And then
Oven was
the bathrooms, it's just little things where it's like, oh man, like, it's okay. They're like, it's okay, we have a cleaning crew come through regardless anyway. I'm like, then why did you make me spend that money if you're gonna do it again anyway? But it's fun.
Because I could.
They were very nice landlords.
Maybe they just don't want to give their cleaning job that has like beer cans, like
Yeah, like a sanitary
you do the
clean
first
versus
sweep
a like.
versus a deep clean. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's on them. If the new people, if I moved in and it was gross,
Yeah.
I would be upset with the landlords, and
Right.
so I totally understand. But
Yeah, like I
Your
mean, in
first
mine
level,
it
then
was
you do
gross,
a
and I'm
section.
like, well, I guess I'll do it myself.
All right. Someone wanna open this up in prayer this morning?
Father, we just ask that you'd open our hearts and minds to your word, give Justin wisdom in his teaching, and just let your word ring and be praised in all things, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Emma wants to know if Laura's on her way. She just pulled in, I think.
When does Laura miss church? Only when
She does
she's
like
sick.
garbage.
She's not sick. So
Or when
she's
she's hoping out.
Or
When she knows you're out of town and Starbucks is having a
Where
special.
did my
She doesn't buy Starbucks anymore.
wow, when did that?
2
She's a
years.
tea
I was
girl.
gonna say it's been a while.
Yeah, she does I tea like now. that.
She just gets coffee for that.
She just, yeah, and on Sunday she
It's
gets
been like
tea and
2
coffee.
years.
She's switched to tea.
And just a heads up, we're out of batteries for the mic, so no audio. So Ms. probably could just close.
Maybe I could just send out an email saying we're not starting
Yeah.
out today.
All right, so
Don't have a picture.
quick recap. Going over the history of Rome, the history of the church and going through Rome. So last class, we got into the splitting up of Rome. So under Valerian, was the last point in which Rome was a unified Rome, and Rome was dealing with enemies on all fronts. So they were dealing with the Sassanids, Shapur, in the east, the Franks in the west, which are essentially the French, and the Goths in the north, and the Germanic tribes also in the north. So the Goths were coming around basically the Baltic Peninsula, and the Germanic tribes were approaching across the Danube River. So Valerian set up in order to try to deal with the enemies on all fronts.
It was 9-volt batteries.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kenny said that he was gonna go get some,
Okay.
just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
So to confront the enemies on all fronts, Valerian set up his son Gallienus as co-emperor, who then also set up his son as co-emperor. So he essentially had 3 emperors. And so Valerian headed east to deal with Shapur, but was eventually captured by Shapur and his military. And there's speculation on how he was killed, or whether he was killed, or if he was just made prisoner. But regardless, Gallienus was left and his son as emperor, and the encroaching enemies, it got to the point where Gallienus could only be with the legions could only be at one location at a time. So the local legions ended up having to rely on their generals for defensive support, and they would ultimately be named emperor by their associated legions. So we have these upspringings of self-made emperors within Rome, to the point where eventually 2 individuals stood out but maintained a relationship with Central Rome, with Gallienus. So those were Marcus Postumus, who established the Gallic Empire in the west. So he oversaw the territory of like England, Britannia, Spain, France, and then we had Odaenathus, who oversaw the Eastern Empire, which would become the Ptolemaic Empire. So he dealt with he oversaw Syria and Judea, Egypt, Spain. Yep. So he was basically the primary opposition against Shapur, the Sassanids, and their advancing army. And he did a very good job. So he was able to muster up Eastern legions and push back the Sassanids, reclaimed, because at one point the Sassanids had overrun Syria. With their motivation was to reclaim what used to be Persian territory. And so Odenathus was able to push them back.
Sassanids, were they Greek?
No, they were Persian.
Persian.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they were a royal family within Persia that essentially overtook, because prior to this, Persia was made up of a number of royals, and the Sassanid family kind of overtook the empire, and that's when Shapur took office. So Odaenathus, go ahead.
So
caliph. Yeah, I didn't know that term. So Odaenathus, maintained a good relationship with Gallienus back in Rome. So here's the three empires. So Ptolemaic Empire. Here's the Sassanids here. And then you have this is the main Roman Empire under Gallienus, and then you have the Gallic Empire. And so Odaenathus, remained loyal to Rome. He instituted basically the same systems as Rome. So did Postumus. So he established his own senate, but they basically maintained the same structure of government. And we'll come back to also, if you remember, under Gallienus's reign, he basically excluded the Senate from anything to do with the military. So this is really the first time in Roman history where in a sense, an executive branch was established. So we have a complete separation between the Senate and the emperor. So anybody that was part of the senatorial class could not serve in the military, could not take up office in the military. Prior to this, the local governor of a region would oversee the legions assigned there, and now under Gallienus, the military, the armies reported back directly through their generals to Gallienus, to the emperor. So it was truly an executive branch established within Rome. And then if you remember, to try to maintain, because it had become a common theme for soldiers to wax and wane, their support for the emperor, so they would, support their local general, name him emperor. To kind of combat that, Gallienus, because pay was one of the main motivations of the soldiers, so he established 3 additional mints throughout the Roman Empire, the primary one being within Rome, and he did that in order to, speed up the payment method for the soldiers, and also ultimately print more money, which we talked about, the inflation that Rome started going through, and the value of the coin, which we'll retouch on here. So even though Rome had split 3 ways, historians mostly agree that that's probably what saved Rome from completely being overrun by, especially the Germanic tribes, because, up until this point, the Germanic tribes had all been, separate tribes, had their own motivations, and those tribes started to unify, with their main motivation to advance on Roman territory. So we start seeing basically a unified Germany, basically the early creation of Germany. And so, the separation of Rome allowed, before this, someone would be named emperor, then they would take their legions and march back on Rome, try to take over and get blessings from the Senate, but with the splitting up of these 3 primary empires, it created a system where the emperor of those regions was primarily focused on that empire, so they had no interest in going back to Rome, diverting their attention away from whatever country they were dealing with. So that allowed, Rome to maintain some sense, still maintain a government, and an economy, and not be overrun. So then in 267, Odenathus was preparing, the emperor in the east was preparing to go against the Goths, because the Goths were, they were gaining steam, and they had built a navy of 500 ships, and they were rolling south through the Black Sea, making their way, across Turkey and into Greece. And so Odenathus was preparing to, basically support Gallienus in defeating the Goths, and he ended up being assassinated, more than likely by his nephew. His nephew had breached some protocol, and Odenathus basically publicly humiliated him, and so in retaliation, his nephew assassinated him. So this left Odenathus's widow as essentially the sole ruler of the Eastern Ptolemaic Empire, and that was Zenobia, so Queen Zenobia. So there's some kind of myths that you read about when it comes to Septimia Zenobia. She was a Arab / Aramean, but there are some accounts from ancient letters from those that were actually part of the primary Christian movement that alleged that she was of Jewish descent. So, which kind of stems from, well, we'll get into that. So upon the death of her husband, Zenobia stepped forward and took charge of the Eastern Empire, and this was primarily due because her son was still too young to take the position of ruler. Zenobia had shrewd political experience and the backing of one of her husband's top generals, who was Zappus, and so she took on all the authority that Odenathus had before anybody else could claim the throne. So, and the Germanic tribes, so he was too busy to weigh in on the matter, and so he did send an emissary east to the queen, just to remind her who's still in charge. But in response, the queen basically did a Spartan thing, kicked him in the pit, completely humiliated him. So
If the statue's any resemblance, then she's really strong, because I think she's a ghoul.
yeah, it seems like noses don't last very long with the statues. So as I mentioned, the Goths in 267 led a fleet of 500 ships south past the Black Sea, and were able to sack Athens and Sparta, but were eventually destroyed by Gallienus's navy as they headed back north. So this was Zenobia's first step in her plan to turn the Ptolemaic Empire into a completely independent, free empire. So she launched a campaign that brought Egypt and Syria under her sway, and removing the heavily relied upon food supply from Rome. So Zenobia gained control of both Syria and Egypt. And in an effort to attract supporters, Zenobia accommodated Christians and Jews, and there are records of her dealing with some of the more powerful bishops within the Christian movement. Some sources suggest that she held authority over churches in Antioch and would assign influential clerics to positions of authority within the church. This is where the term diocesan appeared in history under Zenobia's reign. So essentially a diocesan is an official office of bishop that holds authority over multiple churches within the district. So just further proof that, you know, the primary Christian movement, the churches under the primary Christian movement were moving towards an instituted hierarchical structure. In 268, Gallienus received word that his right-hand man and General Areolus had started a revolt, and so Gallienus had to divert his efforts in pushing back the Goths and head back to Italy to quash the revolt. So as Gallienus was pushing back Areolus, a cohort of his officers who were unhappy with how Gallienus was running things hatched a plot against him and had him assassinated. So Gallienus ruled for 15 years and was 50 years old when he was assassinated. So, as was standard, the Roman troops then recommended Marcus Aurelius Claudius Gothicus as emperor.
Say that 3 times fast.
So Claudius was one of Gallienus's most trusted military advisors, and so this marked the start of Rome being ruled and legions being led by non-Italian, what are called Illyrians.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
On the previous slide, why is that painting depicting her in chains? Is she captured?
That's part of the like jewelry.
That's choice.
That's one way to put it. She looks captive.
No,
It's like permanent jewelry now. Like people have it around their belly buttons and stuff like that. Chains
Well,
hanging around.
this-
Can you imagine like trying to like, I don't know. I guess she does have space in between her 2 wrists, so you know it's not quite.
I would take this to be that she's some sort of kind of vassal queen where there's a higher authority over her, but this is the paintings like that, there's always some sort of
yeah, it's possible.
rationale
I
behind
didn't
it.
really look into the details of the painting. But, you know, a lot of this history was written from Rome's perspective, so in order to save face, they probably would have told, you know, said, you know, yeah, she was, you know, she was one of our vassal leaders. She did what we told her.
Yeah.
But ultimately, she didn't, so. So Rome is now ruled by an Illyrian. So Illyrians were a group of Indo-European speaking people who lived on the Western Balkan Peninsula. The Illyrians would eventually become what we now call the Albanians. So both the majority of the military, especially the leaders within Rome's military, and moving forward the emperors. So Constantine was an Illyrian. Rome will be ruled by Illyrians. So immediately, Gothicus announced that anyone supporting Areolus, who was the person that assassinated Gallienus, who basically led the assassination of Gallienus, would be as good as dead unless they brought him Areolus's head. And so the officers under Areolus responded and brought Gothicus his head and claimed loyalty to Gothicus. Claudius immediately went back to facing the Goths and the Germans. He was able to defeat the advancing Goths, but instead of putting them all to death, he instituted a systematic policy of settling defeated enemies inside Italy, putting them to work to boost the Roman economy and providing more recruits to the legions. So now at this point, moving forward in Rome, they start integrating in, defeated nations into their culture and military.
Might have always done that.
Yeah, it, depended from emperor to emperor. the civilians they would absorb, but, you know, most emperors would basically completely annihilate any of the military, so Rome at this point is facing a depleting resource of recruits, so they have to kind of come up with a method of replenishing their army. And then, you know, I think last weekend I mentioned the Alemanni. So the Alemanni were a Scandinavian of Scandinavian origin that were part of the Germanic tribes. So they also made their move on Italy. You know, if you remember right, or remember from last weekend, they actually made it all the way to Rome before being pushed back. So they making another attempt on Italy, but were easily defeated by Claudius. And then Claudius then began to focus on reunifying Rome. And so he sent one of his lieutenants with a few legions west to see how much of the Gallic Empire he could bring back to Rome. And they were able to bring back most of southern Gaul, which is basically the territory east of the Rhine River, and secure the return of the Iberian province, which, you know, essentially is Spain. You see that? Huh? You see that? Yeah. So the Rhine River, I believe, runs around here somewhere. So he brings back basically this whole territory here, Spain. Yep. Portugal. So Claudius left this mission to the lieutenant because in 269 a new player had entered the game along with the Danube, along the Danube border, who were the Vandals. So the Vandals start becoming basically the most dangerous enemy that Rome has to start dealing with. So the Vandals were Eastern Germanic people who originated in what is modern day Poland. So in early 270, while dealing with the Vandals, Claudius fell ill with the Cyprian plague, and he died. So almost around the same time as Gallienus's assassination in the west, Postumus was also killed by his men after he refused to sack one of the towns in his nearby territory who had attempted to install their own emperor. So in a fit of rage, Postumus' men cornered him and killed him. And so in under a year's time, the leaders of all three empires had been either assassinated or killed. So the office of emperor for the Gallic Empire was then purchased by Marcus Victorinus, who came from a wealthy mother, Victoria. So after Claudius's death, the legions of Rome decided on Lucius Domitius Aurelian. So Aurelian was one of the top two generals under Claudius and led the mobile cavalry. And he had earned the nickname Sword in Hand because he was known for being tough, humorless, disciplined, and focused.
But he's fun at parties.
Oh yeah. He would have otherwise been despised by the legions had he not been very talented and almost unbeatable in the field. So by this time in the east, Zenobia was making moves that signaled she had no intention of coming back to the fold of Rome. So, you know, as I mentioned, she had ordered her army to enter Egypt and occupy Alexandria, which Rome viewed as an act of war. Aurelian immediately headed back to the Balkans to address the advancing Vandals. He ordered everything that could be consumed by man and horse to be brought within the confines of the cities, leaving the Vandals without anything to eat and drink, which allowed Aurelian to easily defeat them. So,
Reverse siege.
what's that?
Like
Yeah,
a reverse.
reverse siege. Aurelian allowed the remaining Vandals to return home with the stipulation that they hand over 2,000 cavalrymen to serve in the Roman army. So with plagues, famines, and inflation going on in Rome, fresh recruits for the military were drying up. So Aurelian knew he had to draw fresh recruits from somewhere to help in reunifying Rome. So he decided that the German troops would make a great source of recruits, and so this would lead to the so-called Germanization of the legions. So the Roman legions would start moving towards, a majority of them being Germanic. Aurelian was then informed that once again the Alemanni were advancing into Rome and had made their way into the Po Valley, which is just to the west of Venice. And marching straight for Rome, Aurelian and his men were ambushed by the Alemanni, sending them into a humiliating retreat. And so Aurelian regrouped his troops and with vengeance advanced on the Alemanni, pushing them back north and completely defeated them, only allowing them to flee back home if they gave over their fighting men to the legions. So this particular defeat would bring in an influx of 40,000 fighting Germans to the Roman army. So then in 271, Aurelian finally entered Rome, but was received with an uprising and riots. So the reason for these riots were threefold. There was lingering effects of Aurelian's initial humiliation when they were ambushed. So that kind of put everyone on edge about the efficacy of Aurelian as emperor. The disruption of the grain supply that was caused by Zenobia's capture. So if you remember, that was one of Rome's primary food source was Egypt. So now that Zenobia controlled it, they were running low on food. And third was the massive fraud that was taking place daily in the main imperial mint within Rome. So if you remember right, pull that back up. So the mines within Rome and the territory of Rome were drying up. So the emperors leading up to this point were forced to debase their coinage to keep up with the increasing rate of production. So in a matter of 200 years, from Augustus to Severus, the standard denarius had declined in its silver content from 98% to 50%. So that's over a period of 200 years. And then approaching in this time period that we're at, with Gallienus and Aurelius, over the 50-year period, silver content had declined from 50% to 1.5%. So now the coin, the Roman standard coin, denarius, I believe, only had 1.5% silver within it. And so if you remember, the government's trying to, promise the people that, that our coin hasn't lost value, but the merchants know better. They know the makings of the coin. So instead of going by, counts of coin, when, in a purchase, they would go by the weight of the coin. And so, here's this mint in Rome, the main imperial mint that is defrauding the government. So they're the workers within the mint and the managers and even some of the senators were pocketing all of the remaining silver. So the coins at this point had no silver in them. So they knew that if Aurelian entered into Rome, that essentially their heads would roll. And so they instituted riots, or instigated riots, to try to overthrow Aurelian. And so they could, maintain their fraud. So Aurelian called in troops to support the urban cohorts, and after thousands were killed on both sides, the riots were ended. And then following the riots, Aurelian instituted a purge which would take the lives of the administrators of the mint and all of the senators who were involved in the fraud and the riots. And then he closed the Roman mint for good within Rome. So the closing of the Roman imperial mint basically symbolized the vanishing political and economical relevance that Rome had in the world. So this is basically a turning point for Rome in terms of their influence, economic influence. So with the advancing Vandals and the Alemanni, Aurelian realized that Rome was no longer a safe, comfortable location that had no need for protection. So he decided to implement a policy to build walls around each major city, starting with Rome. And this is where we get Aurelian's Wall around Rome. So Aurelian's Wall was averaged 11 feet thick by 26 feet high and would span 12 miles, surrounding an area of 5.5 square miles. And then every 100 feet he had a tower built. So he, given that the military was too busy, typically Rome would have the legions build, they were basically their engineers. And in fact, I think that's where our military got, our idea for, well, most of our ideas, but for the Seabees. Army Corps. So, but because of, all these advancing nations, he employed the civilians to build the wall, so its quality was not up to snuff. It had no consistency. One section of wall would look a lot different than the other section of wall, and it just took a lot longer to build. Government contract. So, but over the centuries, it's been rebuilt. So I think I'll end there. So we're coming up on a heavy purge on Christianity. One of the emperors that's coming up, and then a complete flip flop. So we're coming up on Constantine here shortly. So any comments or questions? Okay. Just as a quick reminder, right now, in terms of our history, so we've looked at the Montanists, who separated out of the primary movement, and the Novatian, which separated out just prior to this time period. So, yeah, so the Novatian separated, why? Anybody remember why they decided to separate?
Because of the bishops.
Give me more information.
Where was that movement? I don't remember. Can't remember what time period, but they didn't like how the bishops were coming from going to having more control over multiple different churches instead of one church.
Well, that was the separation of the Montanists.
That was Montans.
They didn't agree with the
Isn't it something to do with pseudography? Was
No.
it first?
That was also Montanus. So there was a heavy persecution within, of Christians during Novatian's time. And after the persecution was relieved, during the persecution, a lot of the leaders, the bishops, people within authority, basically bent the knee, because at the time, it was, gotta remember the emperor, Decius. So Decius had required all Roman citizens to offer up a sacrifice to their god, to the Roman gods, and claim the emperor as Lord. And they were issued a ticket when they did so. And so a lot of the bishops lost heart and did so. They offered up sacrifices to the Roman gods. And after Decius's death and persecution was lifted, a lot of those bishops asked for forgiveness and be reinstated in their positions of authority. And so the primary Christian movement supported that, reinstituted these people, and the Novatian, who was a bishop within Rome, opposed that. So he felt like they should not be reinstituted and instated in the positions of authority. So he split off and started the Novatian movement, Anabaptist movement. So, and that was, I think it started in Turkey.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Montanus is Piedmont Valley, right? France?
Montanus I think
Or
that's the
Swiss
Paulicians.
Alps.
Montanus started in Africa.
Are you thinking the Paulicians?
So, Montanus was from Anatolia. He was Tertullian was a supporter of his. Tertullian was from Africa. And the Montanus movement spread through Asia Minor, North Africa, southern Gaul, so southern France, and for a time it grew in Rome.
Okay. Africa, southern France.
Yeah, so it would have
Right
went
around.
across northern
Right
Africa.
around, too.
Yeah. So that's all I got.